In this video, we are going to discuss regarding our unit number 2, that is absorption of water, from paper 2, that is plant physiology. In previous video of this topic, we have discussed role of water in plants, and in this video we are going to discuss about mechanism of water absorption with respect to crop plants. We know that root are the part of plants which are mainly responsible for absorption of water. So first of all, look at the slide. We will see the diagrammatic representation of a root tip showing root hair zones. This diagram shows what are the different characteristic features of roots which are responsible or took part in the absorption of water. In higher plants, water is absorbed through root hairs. Root hairs which are in contact with soil water and form a root hair zone little behind the root tips. Now, root hairs are the tubular hair-like prolongation of the cells of epidermal layer of roots. And when this epidermis bears a root hair, it is also known as a piliferous layer. The wall of root hairs are permeable and consist of pectic substances and cellulose which are strongly hydrophilic, that is water loving in nature. And root hairs contains vacuole filled with cell sap. Look at the diagram. It shows three major zones. First one is meristematic region, which is at the tip of root. Second is elongation zone. Third is maturation zone. The meristematic zone consists of a meristematic cells which is protected by the root cap, and these meristematic cells redivides and add a cells into the roots so that growth of root is carried out. In maturation regions, you can see there are long elongated tube-like structure. This structure is called as a root hair, and zone of this root hair is also known as a root hair zones. These root hairs are nothing but the prolongation of epidermal cells. And when epidermis bear root hairs, it is called as a piliferous layer of root. The wall of root hairs are consisting of pectic substances and cellulose, and both these substances, that is pectic substances and cellulose, are strongly hydrophilic, that means water loving in nature, and these walls are also permeable for water. So due to these characteristics, root hair zone or root hairs took part actively in absorption of water from soil. There is a region of elongation in between meristematic region and region of maturation. What is the role of that region? This elongation region is responsible for root elongation. When root elongates, the older hairs, that root hairs, dies and new root hairs are developed in this region so that they are in contact with fresh supply of water in the soil. In other words, this elongation region is responsible for elongation or development of root and formation of new root hair zone, which is responsible for penetration of root deep into the soil and absorb water from the soil. This water absorption from soil is carried out by different mechanisms. And now we are going to discuss regarding these different mechanisms of water absorption. There are two main mechanisms of water absorption. First one is active absorption and second one is passive absorption. Active absorption again divided into two types. One, that is active osmotic absorption of water, and second one, active non-osmotic absorption of water. First of all, we will discuss what is active absorption of water. In active absorption of water, the root cells plays active role in absorption of water and metabolic energy released through respiration is consumed. So, active absorption may be of two kinds. Osmotic absorption, that is when water is absorbed from the soil into xylem of root according to osmotic gradients, and second one is non-osmotic absorption, that is when water is absorbed against the osmotic gradient. Second mechanism is passive absorption of water. It is mainly due to transpiration. The root cell do not play active role and remain passive. That's why it is called as a passive absorption of water. In other words, जेव्हा वॉटर ॲब्सॉर्प्शनमध्ये रूट ॲक्टिवली पार्टिसिपेट होतात आणि मेटाबॉलिक एनर्जी म्हणजे ATPचं कन्झम्पशन होतं, त्या वॉटर ॲब्सॉर्प्शनच्या मेकॅनिझमला आपण ॲक्टिव्ह ॲब्सॉर्प्शन ऑफ वॉटर म्हणतो. आणि पॅसिव्ह ॲब्सॉर्प्शन कधी म्हणतो, जेव्हा ॲब्सॉर्प्शन ऑफ वॉटर हे ट्रान्सपिरेशन फेनॉमेनॉनमुळे होते. ट्रान्सपिरेशन ही प्रोसेस रिस्पॉन्सिबल असते ॲब्सॉर्प्शन ऑफ वॉटरसाठी. जिथे रूट्सचा ॲक्टिव्ह रोल नसतो त्या कंडिशनला आपण काय म्हणतो तर पॅसिव्ह ॲब्सॉर्प्शन ऑफ वॉटर. लेट्स सी व्हॉट इज ॲक्टिव्ह ॲब्सॉर्प्शन ऑफ वॉटर इन डिटेल. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, ॲक्टिव्ह ऑस्मॉटिक ॲब्सॉर्प्शन ऑफ वॉटर. First step in the osmotic absorption of water is the imbibition of soil water by the hydrophilic cell wall of root hairs. Means root hairs जे की सेल्युलोज आणि पेक्टिक सबस्टन्सेसनी बनलेले आहेत, जे की वॉटर लविंग आहेत, ते काय करतात तर सॉइल वॉटरला ॲब्सॉर्ब करतात किंवा सोक करतात. Osmotic pressure of cell sap of root hairs is usually higher than the osmotic pressure of soil water, and therefore the diffusion pressure deficit, that is DPD, and the suction pressure in root hairs become higher and water from the cell walls enters into them and through plasma membrane by osmotic diffusion, and as a result the OP, suction pressure and DPD of root hairs now become lower while their turgor pressure is increased. In short, increased osmotic pressure, increased diffusion pressure deficit, that is DPD, and suction pressure become responsible for intake of water from soil into the root cells by the process called as a osmotic diffusion. Osmotic diffusion म्हणजे काय तर movement of water from higher concentration to lower concentration through semi permeable membrane. आणि इथे काय होतंय तर वॉटर जे आहे, सॉइल वॉटर जे आहे ते रूट हेअर्सच्या सेमी परमिएबल मेम्ब्रेनमधून आतमध्ये येते. त्यामुळे आपण ह्याला काय म्हणतो तर ॲब्सॉर्प्शन ऑफ वॉटर अकॉर्डिंग टू ऑस्मोटिक ग्रेडियंट. ओके. नाउ व्हेन वॉटर comes inside the root hair cells become turgor and osmotic pressure, suction pressure and DPD of root hairs become lower, and at the same time cortical cells which are adjacent to root hairs have higher OP, higher suction pressure and DPD in comparison to root hairs, and therefore water is drawn into the adjacent cortical cells from the root hairs by osmotic diffusion. In other words, ॲक्च्युली जेव्हा OP, सक्शन प्रेशर आणि DPD हे रूट हेअरमध्ये हाय होतं तेव्हा सॉइल वॉटर जे आहे ते ऑस्मॉटिक डिफ्युजननी रूट हेअरमध्ये आलं, आणि रूट हेअरमध्ये आल्यामुळे रूट हेअरमधलं हे काय OP, DPD आणि सक्शन प्रेशर आहे ते कमी होतं आणि टर्जरिटी वाढते. ॲट द सेम टाईम रूट हेअरच्या आतल्या बाजूला जो काही कॉर्टिकल रिजन आहे त्याच्यामध्ये मात्र OP, DPD आणि सक्शन प्रेशर हायर असतो. त्यामुळे जसं पहिल्यांदा सॉइलमधून वॉटर इपिडर्मल सेल्समध्ये आले तसंच हे रूट हेअर्सचे सेल्स आहेत त्याच्यातून वॉटर काय होतं तर ऑस्मोटिक डिफ्युजननी पुन्हा कॉर्टिकल रिजनमध्ये येतं. पुन्हा कॉर्टिकल रिजनचं जे काही ॲडजस्टंट सेल्स असतील तिथे हायर OP, DP आणि सक्सेशन प्रेशर असल्यामुळे काय होतं तर हे जे काही वॉटर आहे ते पुन्हा आतल्या बाजूला मुवमेंट दाखवतं थ्रू ऑस्मोटिक डिफ्युजन, आणि ही प्रोसेस अशीच चालू राहते ज्याच्यामुळे वॉटर आहे ते आउटर सेल्समधून इनर सेल्सपर्यंत अगदी एंडोडर्मिसपर्यंत काय होतं तर मुवमेंट दाखवतो आणि आतल्या बाजूला एंटर करतं. In endodermis, osmotic diffusion of water into endodermis takes place through special thin-walled passage cells. Because other endodermal cells have Casparian strips on their walls, which are impervious to water. मीन्स एंडोडर्मिसमध्ये तुम्हाला थिन वॉल्ड ज्या सेल्स आहेत ज्यांना आपण पॅसेज सेल असं म्हणतो त्या काय करतात तर वॉटर मुवमेंटला रिस्ट्रिक्ट करत नाहीत. पण एंडोडर्मिसमधल्या ज्या काही अदर सेल्स आहेत ज्यांच्यावर थिकनिंग बघायला मिळतं, ज्या थिकनिंगना आपण कॅस्पेरियन स्ट्रिप्स असं म्हणतो, तर त्या कॅस्पेरियन स्ट्रिप्स असणाऱ्या सेल मात्र वॉटर मुवमेंट रिस्ट्रिक्ट करतात, सो दॅट दे आर कॉल्ड एज इम्परवस टू वॉटर. Later, water from endodermal cell is drawn into the cells of pericycle by osmotic diffusion, which now becomes turgid and their suction pressure is decreased. And in the last step, water is drawn into xylem from turgid pericycle cells. In roots, the vascular bundles are radial and protoxylem elements are in contact with pericycle. So, pericycle मधून सुरुवातीला वॉटर जे आहे ते प्रोटोझायलेम मध्ये येतं आणि प्रोटोझायलेम मधून मग ते मेटाझायलेम आणि मग झायलेम स्ट्रँड पर्यंत पोहोचतं. It is because in absence of turgor pressure of xylem vessels, which are non-elastic in nature, the suction pressure of xylem vessels become higher than the suction pressure of cells of the pericycle. And when water enters into the xylem from pericycle, a pressure is developed in the xylem of roots, which can raise the water to certain height in the xylem. And this pressure is called as a root pressure. Look at the diagrammatic representation which shows a tiers of typical dicot root in which the arrow indicates the path of water. सुरुवातीला soil water root hairsच्या contact मध्ये येतात आणि root hair मध्ये due to osmotic gradient, that is osmotic diffusion, water comes into root hair cells, from root hair to cortical region, from cortical region to endodermis, from endodermis to pericycle, and from pericycle to protoxylem and then metaxylem. And in this way, water absorption mechanism is carried out. And because this absorption is according to osmotic gradient, it is called as a active absorption of or active osmotic absorption of water. Now, let's see what is active non-osmotic absorption of water. Sometimes it has been observed that absorption of water takes place even when osmotic pressure of soil water is higher than osmotic pressure of cell sap. This type of absorption, which is non-osmotic and against the osmotic gradient, requires the expenditure of metabolic energy, that is ATP, probably through respiration. See, generally water absorption केव्हा होतं, जेव्हा osmotic pressure of root cell is higher than osmotic pressure of soil water. बट काही वेळेला काय होतं तर सॉइल वॉटरचं ऑस्मोटिक प्रेशर हायर असतं. अशा केसमध्ये मेटाबॉलिक एनर्जी युटिलाइज करून म्हणजे ATPचा वापर करून जेव्हा रूट हेअर्स वॉटर ॲब्सॉर्ब करतात अगेन्स्ट ऑस्मोटिक ग्रॅडियंट, that is called as a active non-osmotic absorption of water. And this phenomenon of active non-osmotic absorption of water is supported by few evidences. Let's see what are those. First one, the factors which inhibit respiration also decrease water absorption. म्हणजे जर रेस्पिरेशन थांबलं तर वॉटर ॲब्सॉर्प्शन काय होतं, कमी होतं किंवा रेस्पिरेशन